So, the other thing that I'm doing right now is just wearing this particular t-shirt, which I think kind of, if I was to introduce somebody by the method of t-shirt, this would be the t-shirt to do it. It obviously looks like something quite colourful and, you know, full of complexity and peacockness. But if you look a bit more closely, that complexity is actually built out of a number of tools, a number of little devices, about each of which you could ask a nice question. You could ask the question, what's it for? What's it do? And it seems to me that the thing that Dan brings most consistently to his work in philosophy of mind and on all subjects is this question, well, what's it for? What's it do? What happens next? So as we go through these remarks on Dan, I think that's an issue that we'll see coming up again and again. And the last thing that I want to say in general scene setting here, I was listening to the new skipper talking about how he was going to handle the boat. And he said the main thing to remember if you're going to handle a boat is as little as possible, as much as necessary. And I think that kind of nicely sums up Dan's take on what gets into the mind too. As little as possible, but as much as necessary. So I think we're going to explore some of that space. So anyway, let's look at the particular paper that I'm going to focus on is the how and why paper. And this is a paper in which Dan presents the sort of basic framework for thinking about consciousness that he's been working on for many years, and then sort of takes that framework through a new iteration, kind of what I'll call the Bayesian twist. Okay, so this is a plan. I'll say a couple of words about Basic Dan. This is Desperate Dan, a British comics character who Dan put Andy Cap up for me, so I could get some revenge with a comic character here. Then we'll have a look at the Bayesian twist, and then a couple of discussion points. Okay. So let's look at the core argument here. I think the core claim in all Dan's work here is that there's just no need for and no existence of double transduction in the brain. And really and truly, I think once you understand that claim, you've understood most of it. The rest is kind of clean up, clarification, persuasion, thought experiments to convince you haven't left out the stuff you really cared about. You know, there is a peacock in there somewhere, it's all made of tools.
Swiss Army peacock.
A Swiss Army peacock, yeah, it could be a Swiss Army peacock. But maybe the tools have a something kind of fundamental going on as well in the kind of Bayesian twist point, yeah. So, I think the argument is just this. This is what happens to you. You're hit by a barrage of energies coming from the outside world. Those energies get transduced into things that can do things, stuff that can actually make a difference to what you do and how you behave. Let's just say spike trains for now, but you know, all the stuff that stuff gets transduced into in the brain. And that's it really, that's all the brain gets. They have to be processed so as to yield more spike trains or whatever. Those things have to yield actions, including verbal ones. I think the picture that we have on the table here is understand that, understand how that works, understand all of these tools for doing that kind of thing, and you've solved the problem. So there's no role left here for transduction into something else, these qualia that we've been talking about along the way. There's no need to, as it were, take all those incoming energies, turn them into something kind of qualitative and experiential in some difficult sense, and then use the qualitative, experiential, in some difficult sense, stuff to drive your responses. Just cut out that middle bit. After all, if you did turn them into something richer inside, you'd still have to turn them into something that can drive responses. So that's kind of the idea. Cut out the middle toad, as I think Dan said in one of his early pieces. Take the energies, turn them into spike trains, use them to do stuff. Okay. So obviously this is a good start. You know, stamping out this threat of double transduction is a place to start, but Dan's always been clear that it's not really a finish because you've also got to do something else, and it's this other thing that is really, really tough. You've got to explain why things seem the way they do to us. Because it doesn't seem to us as if we're just nice transformers for external energies into apt worldly actions. That's not how it appears. So if it is all just that stuff, energy coming in, transformations, actions coming out, why does it seem to us as if we're doing all this fancy stuff? Rotating mental images, appreciating colours and textures, recognising dogs. And I think that, at least I put this on the table, if we could answer that question to everyone's satisfaction, that would be the end. There'd be no need for cruises like this, that would be a shame. But you know, that would be the end of the qualia wars. Okay, and it's at that point that this new move, It's a kind of version of the old moves, but it's just a new way of couching the moves that were already there, I think. It's meant to do some work. So the first critter to bring on stage here is the strange inversion. Strange inversions are something that Dan's had a long and happy history with. That sounds good, doesn't it? And they come in many, many different forms. Their key characteristic is they turn something on its head. I guess that's why they're inversions of some kind. So the one you're probably most familiar with is Hume's strange inversion. You see X causing Y is the old idea. You form the idea of causal connection. But hey, maybe it's not like that. Instead, you see Y following X. You come to expect that regular succession. And that strong expectation of reliable succession is projected back into the world as an apparently perceptible causal connection. But it's actually, if Hume's right, you kind of added the causalness of that connection when you projected stuff back onto the world. So in this way, this is a quote from Dan's How and Why paper, we misinterpret an inner feeling, an anticipation, as an external property. Or as Hume had it rather beautifully, we gild and stain natural objects with stuff that is borrowed from internal sentiment. I think this is pretty much the model. Dan says this is pretty much the model for his own attempted account of, or deflation of, and we'll come to that issue later, of qualia. So here's an example that we can put on the table, straight out of Dan's paper, the sweet taste of honey. So there's a standard story here. We think we like the honey because it tastes so sweet. And then you do the little kind of Humean style of inversion and say instead, look, when you like the honey, what's happening is just you have a subtle complex of reactive dispositions, stuff that all of these tools, as it were, make happen when you are exposed to the barrage of sensory stimulation coming from honey. You have this barrage of reactions then, tendencies to seek it out, to lick it, to stick your finger in it, all that sort of stuff. And at that point, you project that back onto the world itself. So the thought would be, look, the complex of reactive dispositions is what's doing the work here. That's what comes first in a conceptual, logical sense here. And we dub the things that evoke that particular complex as sweet. So there's the inversion. It's not the sweetness that explains your response. It's your response that constitutes the sweetness. And that's the same account, I think, as we're going to get of qualia. It's not that the qualia explain our responses or drive our responses or are some sort of secret data that we need to do justice to. Instead, they're simply, as it were, names for dispositions, complexes of responses. So this is going to take a little bit of persuading everyone of, but Dan's been doing it for many years, and now I've got the job of trying to do it in 5 minutes. So the thought is, not knowing this, we project the sweetness onto the world. We self-diagnose a perceptual realm presenting all these puzzling things. Honey, sweet honey, cute babies, red stripes, red cola cans, etc. So it's a good move. It aims to show why we think experience presents a world that's full of this odd kind of stuff, sweet tastes. But actually, what we're doing is tracking our own reactive dispositions. When exposed to this stuff, I tend to kind of stick my finger in it, stick my finger in my mouth, say things like, whoa, nice honey, and so on. Okay. So then you need to somehow explain why this yields seeming qualia. How does this projection trick work? This is where Dan adds a new, or at least a new way of doing an old layer of his argument. And this is what I'll call the predictive or Bayesian twist. So the general idea here, that I won't linger on too long because it will be a whole other talk, and one that I think we're actually going to do at some point with the students at least. But the idea here is that the brain meets the incoming raw sensory barrage with a complex web of prediction. It's trying to predict the shape of that barrage over multiple scales of space and time by using whatever resources, whatever sort of constructed tools it can come up with. So the brain's job then is to, if you like, predict the incoming sensory stream, ultimately using knowledge about patterns and probabilities in the world. And we know that works. You can see that working in all kinds of demonstrations in machine learning. State-of-the-art work in digit recognition works this way. Stuff on shape recognition works like this. Hinton has papers with titles like, "To recognize shapes, first learn to generate images." And it's exactly this strategy. So it certainly works. And the idea then is, if you fail to predict the shape of the incoming sensory signal, That yields a string of prediction errors, and you use those to recruit new ways of trying to get to grips with the shape of the incoming signal. Prediction errors. So the upshot, this is the Bayesian bit, is that what the brain's trying to do is find the linked set of hypotheses that, given the current raw sensory data, make that data most probable. If you want to be Bayesian about it, you're trying to maximize the posterior probability of the observed sensory data. And notice that observed sensory data has to mean here the impinging raw energies. There's not going to be any hint of, as it were, experienced sensory data here. You're just trying to match the raw energies that are coming at you. So no worries about double transduction yet, at least. Quick example of seeing how this might work. In the context of, if you catch the screen there, in the context of reading the A, the B hypothesis is what makes the raw sensory data most probable. But in the context of reading the 12, the 13 hypothesis is what makes the very same raw sensory data most probable. And that's what the Bayesian story, the predictive brain story, is really good at doing. And there's another example that would take longer. 4 candles, 4 candles, same kind of acoustic signal. Famous old British comedy sketch in which it turns out that someone is actually asking for 4 candles. No, 4 candles. Handles for forks, you know, for digging. There's probably a fork on here somewhere. Okay. So it's again, you know, we're moving on well here. The Bayesian predictive brain story does a nice job of explaining why we resolve ambiguities in the sensory signal in certain ways. It also, I think, explains how a structured world comes into view. A world built of the kind of entities that you use, that you represent, in order to predict the shape of the incoming sensory flow. A world built of dogs, cats, schooners, icebergs, maybe even mental states like the beliefs of other agents. So this is a fantastic account, I think, a very promising account at least of content, of representation, of, as it were, the origins of the representations that on this story populate the mind. These tools are mostly made of representations whose job is to get to grips with the sensory signal at many different scales of space and time. So I think at this point you're seeing what I think is just the general move here, and it's one that I totally agree with, which is to replace worries about qualia with research on content. In essence, what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to treat all of this qualitative stuff as content stuff, because it's the content stuff that explains all of our reactions, explains what we say, explains what we do, it's how we build machines. Why not stop there and say, okay, you know, once I've explained all of that, I've explained all there is. So what have we got at this point? We're judged, maybe, that there's a structured world out there, and we can do this without any double, triple, or quadruple transductions. It's all good. But have we still explained why there seem to be qualia? This is the thing that they're going to keep coming back, kind of line, look, we've got these data, we've got to do something with them. The remaining question here is, why don't we encounter that structured world built of schooners and icebergs and all the rest of it in the dark, as Dave puts it at the start of one of his papers? So it feels to me, and I think it feels to Dan too, as if once that structured world nut is cracked, we're getting very, very close indeed. But maybe we need to do one last little thing to close the gap. What we need to do is explain why amongst all that stuff, all those contents that seem to be revealed to us, our own qualitative experiences turn up and why they seem puzzling. So, next move in Dan's micro saga here, the Bayesian twist. So here's how this twist is supposed to go at this point. This is, again, right out of the How and Why paper. Three steps, I think. First of all, we ourselves are good objects for our own prediction machinery to be turned upon. So it's not just that I want to predict what's going on in the world outside me, predict stuff to do with tripods and cameras and so on. I want to predict how I myself am going to react to things. I want to predict I want to predict my own sticking the finger in the honey pot because of my reactive dispositions to do with honey. And the thought is that somewhere along the way there, at that point, we have managed to do the job. We've managed to explain why there seem to be qualia. So let's look at Dan's example in some detail, the cuteness of babies. So the claim here about the cuteness of babies is that the cuteness seemings are learnt expectations concerning our own probable reactions to imminent baby exposure. So basically, you know, when you experience a baby as cute, you expect to feel like cooing, nurturing, stroking, whatever people do with babies. I'm not quite sure, but it's all to do with cute stuff. And at that point, you diagnose yourself as having detected something that's nonetheless a little bit puzzling, given our view of the world. We've kind of detected cuteness in the world, but that seems like a slightly strange property at first, not quite like camera-ness. The same would be true of redness, although it's slightly harder to explain. So the thought is, quote from Dan, when we expect to see the baby in the crib, we also expect to find it cute. That is, we expect to feel the urge to cuddle it, and so forth. So this is all just disguised predictions of our own web of reactions to the incoming sensory stream. When you do cuddle the baby with all that in place, the thought is no prediction error signal, because you're expecting to have that complex of reactive dispositions. And at that point, you'll think that you've discovered cuteness in the world on the basis of the incoming sensory barrage. Okay. So as Dan says, cuteness as a property now passes the Bayesian test for being an objective structural part of the world we live in. So now I'm just going to get to a couple of questions and then stop. So first question about this. I wonder if this is one expectation too many. So as a kind of card-carrying Bayesian here, I wonder whether we actually need to go to the level of expecting to expect our own reactive dispositions. Seems to me that Dan's work is done, actually, once we expect to feel the urge to cuddle the baby, and then once in the room, do indeed feel that urge. So in Dan's own terms, I don't think he needs to expect to feel the urge. I think he just needs an account of expecting to feel the urge. So I was puzzled by the doubling up of expectation here. Maybe this is a way into some further kind of grip on our own experience, a sort of a more refined grip. But I just invite Dan to say more about expecting to expect to find the baby cute, rather than just expecting to. Okay. Right. Let's get that one on. Second question. And there's only two questions, so this won't go on much longer. Second question. Can either version of this story, either expecting or expecting to expect, do justice to what I'm going to call qualia surprise? So I'm going to end with that puzzle. So here's a qualia surprise puzzle. So before I see the baby, I might very well expect to feel the urge to cuddle it. Maybe I even expect to feel the urge to cuddle it, although I can't quite get a grip on what that's adding to the story. But what about cases where the cuteness of something jumps out and surprises me? So cases where the qualia, if you like, seem to be forcing themselves on me despite my lack of appropriate expectations. So here's an example. A couple of weeks back, if you'd said to me, Andy, what would you think of albino squirrels if you saw them? I'd have said, ugh. You know, because on the whole, albino animals, you know, they're not always the loveliest of animals. I mean, they can be. But I would have just predicted that I wouldn't have liked them very much. But hey, look, then the pictures come out. I think, oh my God, they're cute. Oh yes, I love them. So this is a kind of case of qualia surprise, if you like. The cuteness has jumped out from the world and taken me by surprise. They are cute. So what do we say, you know, if we're doing the Bayesian twist here? Did I non-consciously predict that I'd find them cute? I don't think we should even say that much. What we should say, I think, is that exposed to this novel sensory barrage, my brain's best hypothesis still turned out to be that they were white, fluffy and cute, and that actually whiteness, fluffiness, cuteness, squirrelness are all, if you like, on a par here. They're all content items that are part of our best hypothesis for dealing with that sensory barrage. And this, I think, ties in with stuff that Paul's been talking about. The explanation here, I think, is that the raw sensory inputs have got loads of structure in them. So spotting a novel kind of cuteness is really no harder than spotting a novel kind of chair as a chair or a novel kind of car as a car. You've got a grip on that systematically structured set of patterns in the inputs, and it's a systematic grip that does the work here. Importantly, I think, this is something Dan doesn't really linger on there, but importantly, I think that systematic grip must be largely defined over our own interoceptive responses, the way that our body itself reacts to many of these inputs that are significant to us. So, you know, the idea here is you just tell the content story. The winning multi-level hypothesis that best predicts the incoming sensory stream, in the case of my first cuteness albino squirrel experience, delivered to me a couple of bits of content, white squirrel forms with red eyes apparently bouncing, high-level linguistic classification albino squirrels. But it also tells me about how I'm responding to that seeing. Urge to stroke, to approach, to protect, etc. High-level linguistic classification, cutie pies. Okay, so there, you know, I think, oh, and of course, in line with Dan's commitments, we ought to ask, what's the good of all that extra stuff then? And then what? What does that stuff do? I think those kinds of tools, of course, are the ones, and I think this is exactly the line Dan offers us here. These are among the most important tools for building the kinds of cultures, the kinds of complex human societies that allow us to build more tools, to install more tools in ourselves. But that's another part of the story. So this is a Dan inversion. The perceived cuteness depends on the urge to stroke and protect. It's not the other way around. The urge to stroke and protect does not depend on the perceived cuteness. Okay. Right. So last thing, I think. Oh, okay, one thing before the very last thing. In future, of course, I will expect to find albino squirrels cute. Today's posterior is tomorrow's prior, as Bayesians will say. So that's fine. In the end, I will start expecting to find albino squirrels cute, and maybe that's going to make some extra difference, and I still invite Dan to say something about that. So, provocative summary. Qualia, I think Dan is saying, are just more content items in our best model of the world. That's what they are, if they're anything at all. We'll come to that. They're posited by the brain to reduce the dimensionality of those streams of data, including interoceptive data, that are hitting us as organisms all the time. But we mistake them, I think Dan's saying, for real features of the world because they pass this Bayesian test, as quote from Dan again, for being an objective structural part of the world we live in. They appear as distal causes, just like dogs, cats, albino squirrels, etc. So now, that leads me to just a tiny puzzle. Because it seems to me that that's right. Dogs, cats, loudness, redness, and cuteness are now all being treated in exactly the same way. And that makes me think that redness and cuteness are actually no worse off than dogness and squirrelness. They're all content items inferred as part of the model that you use to predict real patterns in the sensory stream. And they may have further features too, as I think Jess has been looking at, like maybe they're the attended content items best suited for the guidance of agent-level choice and action. But I wonder why this isn't a partial victory for the qualia realist. If redness and cuteness are picking out real patterns in the sensory barrage just like dogness, that doesn't sound so deflationary to me anymore. We discover redness, cuteness, and Merlot tastiness just the way that we discover dogs, cats, hats, and hurricanes. It's true, though, that, of course, doghood depends rather less on our human reactive dispositions to stroke, some of them, not the ones around here, to approach and so on. But that's a small detail. So there's my last question for Dan. Isn't this just a phenomenal realm, now beautifully constructed out of content items without any need for double transduction? So, thanks, Dan. That's it.